the medieval archer was never meant to be admired. He was not the shining knight in armor, not the noble figure carved into memory. He was a tool effective, expendable, and often despised. His value lay not in honor, but in distance. He killed without touching, and for that, he paid a price long before the battlefield ever appeared. The life of a medieval archer began early and without choice. In many regions, boys were required by law to practice archery from childhood. Sundays were not for rest, but for training. Bows were heavy. Draw weights brutal. Muscles were shaped before bodies were ready. Bones twisted under repeated strain. By adulthood, an experienced archer's skeleton was already permanently altered. This was not preparation for glory. It was preparation for damage. A warbow was not a simple weapon. Drawing it repeatedly required immense strength. Archers trained until their backs thickened, their shoulders widened, and their fingers hardened into calloused claws. The bow reshaped the body unevenly. One arm grew stronger than the other, spines curved. Joints deteriorated early. Pain was constant. There was no concept of injury prevention. If an archer could still draw, he was expected to shoot. Torn muscles healed poorly, tendons inflamed and stiffened, fingers split and bled in cold or rain. These were not reasons to stop. They were part of the job. By the time an archer reached a battlefield, his body already carried years of punishment. Socially, archers existed in an uncomfortable space. They were essential, but rarely respected. Knights viewed them with suspicion. Clergy often condemned them for killing from afar. Chroniclers minimized their suffering while exaggerating their effectiveness. The archer was praised when he won battles and blamed when he survived them. In some regions, captured archers were mutilated, hands were cut, fingers broken, eyes destroyed, not out of cruelty alone, but strategy. A knight could ransom himself, an archer could only shoot. Remove his ability, and he ceased to matter. This knowledge followed archers into every fight. They understood that capture meant worse than death. On campaign, life was harsh and unstable. Archers marched on foot, carrying bows taller than themselves, heavy bundles of arrows, spare strings, and basic supplies. Armor was minimal. Mobility mattered more than protection. Rain warped bowstaves. Damp ruined strings. Equipment required constant care, even when exhaustion dominated. Food was inconsistent, shelter unreliable. Archers slept where armies stopped fields, forests, ruined buildings. Cold soaked into bones already damaged by training. Illness spread quickly. Those who fell behind were not waited for. Battle was only a fraction of their suffering. When combat came, archers were placed deliberately. They stood behind infantry, on flanks, or on high ground when available. Their role was simple: break the enemy before contact. Arrows darkened the sky. Shots were released in volleys, not aimed duels. Accuracy mattered less than volume. Each draw pulled pain through muscle and bone. The act of shooting was repetitive and exhausting. Hundreds of arrows might be loosed in a single engagement. Fingers numbed, shoulders burned, breath shortened. Fatigue arrived long before fear faded, and fear was always present. Archers were lightly armored targets. Once enemy lines closed, protection vanished. Infantry screens broke, cavalry charged, archers became prey. They dropped bows and ran. Retreat for an archer was desperate. Without heavy armor, they could move faster, but panic erased coordination. Horses cut them down. Infantry caught them from behind. Many died not while shooting, but while fleeing. Those who could not escape were butchered. The battlefield did not forgive distance killers. Survival required awareness, speed, and luck. Archers who lived long enough learned when to stop shooting and start running. Cowardice was survival. Honor was irrelevant. After battle, archers were rarely rewarded. Knights received ransoms. Lords claimed credit. Archers returned to camp injured, exhausted, and often unpaid. Their contribution was acknowledged only when it was missing, and the war did not end. Campaigns dragged on. March followed march. Battle followed battle. Bodies degraded faster than they healed. An archer in his 30s was already old. When he could no longer draw a bow, there was no pension. Some became guards, others begged. Many returned to labor with broken bodies that could no longer work fields properly. Their war followed them into poverty. This was the reality of the medieval archer. Not a hero standing tall on a hill, but a man shaped by obligation, damaged by training, feared by enemies, distrusted by allies, and discarded when his body failed. And this was only the beginning, because the true cruelty of an archer's life was not just how he fought. It was how little he mattered once the fighting stopped. If the battlefield was cruel, life between battles was worse. For the medieval archer, war was not a single moment of violence, but a prolonged condition. Campaigns lasted months, sometimes years. During that time, archers lived in a state of constant strain, physical, psychological, and social. Their bodies were already breaking. Repeated use of the warbow destroyed joints slowly and irreversibly. Shoulders ground down, elbows inflamed, wrists stiffened. Fingers lost sensation or split open permanently. Pain was not episodic, it was structural. An archer did not recover between battles. He accumulated damage, and yet he was expected to keep shooting. There was no replacement cycle, no rehabilitation. A man who could still draw a bow, even imperfectly, was kept in service. Accuracy declined, speed slowed. Mistakes increased, and mistakes on the battlefield were fatal. Archers understood their own decline better than anyone. They could feel strength leaving them year by year. They knew when a draw was weaker, when an arrow flew short. This awareness created constant anxiety. An archer who could not keep pace endangered his unit and himself. Fear was not abstract. Archers knew how enemies viewed them. They heard stories of captured bowmen having fingers smashed with hammers, hands cut off, or eyes burned. These were not rumors. They were documented practices. An archer disabled could never return to war. That was the point. This knowledge shaped behavior in battle. Archers fought knowing that surrender was not an option. They positioned themselves with escape routes in mind. They watched infantry lines obsessively, ready to run the moment protection failed. Their survival depended on reading the flow of battle faster than anyone else. This constant vigilance exhausted the mind. Sleep on campaign was shallow and irregular. Camps were noisy, cold, and dangerous. Raids were common. Guards rotated poorly. An archer slept with his bow close, strings loosened, arrows ready. Rest never fully came. Food did not restore strength. Rations were basic and insufficient for the physical demands placed on archers. Bread, thin stews, occasional meat. Calories burned were not replaced. Weight dropped. Immunity weakened. Illness spread quickly through archer units already pushed to their limits. Many shot while sick. Fever blurred vision. Coughing disrupted rhythm. Weakness shortened range. None of this mattered to commanders. If arrows were still being loosed, the system functioned. Psychologically, archers carried a unique burden. They killed at distance, but not anonymously. Arrows did not explode on impact. They pierced, lodged, and sometimes left men alive and screaming. Archers saw the results of their work. They watched enemies fall, writhe, and die slowly. This created detachment or collapse. Some archers learned to see targets, not people. Others could not escape the images. Medieval society offered no framework for processing this. No confession absolved repeated killing. No honor balanced it. Clergy often condemned archers. Killing from afar was seen as morally suspect. It lacked the perceived fairness of face-to-face combat. Archers existed in a gray zone necessary, but spiritually questionable. This stigma followed them home. Even victory brought no peace. After battles, archers were tasked with grim work. Guarding prisoners, hunting fugitives, finishing the wounded. Their skill with ranged weapons made them useful in pursuit and execution. They were assigned tasks others avoided. Their humanity eroded quietly. As years passed, many archers aged out of usefulness while still young by modern standards. In their 30s or early 40s, Their bodies could no longer sustain the draw weight required. They became liabilities. There was no formal release. Some were reassigned to lesser roles: guards, watchmen, trainers. Others were simply dismissed. A man who had spent his life training a single skill suddenly had none. Returning to civilian life was brutal. An archer's body was ill-suited for farming. Shoulders and backs failed under different loads. Hands lacked fine control. Chronic pain limited endurance. Many could not perform basic labor reliably. Poverty followed quickly. Without land or trade, former archers drifted. Some begged. Some turned to crime. Some enlisted again with lesser forces, prolonging their decline. War was familiar. Civilian life was not. Society did not celebrate them. There were no monuments to archers' suffering. No compensation for ruined bodies. Songs praised battles, not the men who loosed the arrows. When archers appeared in stories, they were symbols, not people. Disposable, replaceable, forgettable. This is the reality behind the weapon that changed medieval warfare. The longbow did not create heroes. It consumed men. And yet, despite everything, archers continued to fight, not because they believed in glory, but because survival demanded it. Because obligation began in childhood. Because escape was impossible. Because the alternative was starvation. And because once shaped into a weapon, a man was expected to function as one until he broke. But the final cruelty of an archer's life came not during war, or even after. It came in how history remembered him, or rather, how it didn't. When the wars ended, the archer did not return as a veteran. He returned as a problem. Medieval society had little use for men whose bodies were shaped for one task and broken by it. The archer who could no longer draw a war bow lost not only his role, but his value. Strength had been demanded early. Decline was punished silently. There was no concept of aftercare. A former archer carried permanent damage, shoulders frozen with pain, fingers stiff and misshapen, backs curved from decades of uneven strain. These injuries were not visible like missing limbs, but they were no less disabling. Pain followed them into every movement. Work in fields required endurance they no longer had. Lifting caused agony. Repetitive labor inflamed old injuries. Many could not keep pace with younger men. In a subsistence economy, weakness meant hunger. Communities were unforgiving. An archer's past service did not guarantee support. Survival depended on productivity. If a man could not work, he relied on charity. Charity was rare. Pride collapsed quickly. Some found work as guards or watchmen. These roles paid little and offered no security. Others trained younger archers, passing on techniques that had destroyed their own bodies. Many drifted between villages, following musters, hoping for temporary pay. War remained the only constant. Those who re-enlisted did so willingly, despite knowing the cost. War was familiar. Its rules were understood. Civilian life was unpredictable. On campaign, at least, food was sometimes guaranteed. This cycle consumed them. Each return to war shortened what remained of their strength. Each campaign accelerated decline. Eventually, even desperation could not overcome physical failure. At that point, the archer vanished. Some died quietly of illness worsened by years of strain. Others starved during winters when work disappeared. A few turned to theft and were executed. Their ends were unrecorded and unremarkable. History did not notice. Medieval chronicles celebrated victories and commanders. Knights filled pages. Kings filled chapters. Archers appeared as numbers, not names. Their suffering was background noise. Even when archers changed the outcome of wars, credit flowed upward. Victories were attributed to leadership, strategy, or divine favor. The men who loosed tens of thousands of arrows were tools, not authors of history. This erasure was convenient. To acknowledge the true cost of archery would have exposed how deeply medieval warfare depended on long-term damage to ordinary bodies. It was easier to romanticize the bow than the man who drew it. Legends replaced reality. Archers became symbols of skill, independence, and defiance. Their pain was removed, their fear forgotten. The broken bodies that followed victory were erased from memory, but the bones remain. Archaeologists have uncovered skeletons worked by archery, enlarged left arms, twisted spines, damaged joints. These bodies tell a story the written record avoided. They confirm what chronicles ignored. The medieval archer paid for war with his future. He gave strength early, suffered decline young, and aged fast in a world that offered no mercy to the weak. He was feared by enemies, distrusted by allies, and forgotten by history. His life was not short because he fought. It was short because of how he was used. The longbow reshaped medieval warfare, but it also reshaped the men who carried it unevenly, painfully, permanently. Their sacrifice was not sudden. It was slow, cumulative, and invisible. This is the cruelty at the heart of the medieval archer's life. Not that he died violently, but that he survived long enough to be discarded. And when we admire medieval battles, weapons, and tactics, we rarely ask what they demanded in return. The answer lies not in legends, but in damaged bones, forgotten graves, and lives that ended not in glory, but in exhaustion. The medieval archer was never meant to be remembered. He was meant to function, and once he could not, the world moved on without him.